So I am a third-year PhD student in collaboration with Teagasc, Protein and UCC, but I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. So that's my overarching research question. From the biophysical perspective, how suitable are alternative proteins in an Irish agro context now and into the future? I'm not going to go into this. Obviously, we've done this to death so far. We're well aware that our emissions are very high for various reasons which have been discussed, but the overarching project is looking to try and reduce these and bring a kind of a holistic protein project into Cork and Ireland, Wexford, everywhere. So this is somebody else's work. So this is Lilian. It's already almost about 10 years old. There are no newer versions of it. These are the soil erosion rates globally. So the bigger the circle, the faster the soil erosion, or the bigger the soil erosion impact. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it's largely, by and large, is the exact same areas where we have agriculture. So I'll go into it a little bit more, but obviously soil takes hundreds of years to build up and very little time to break down. So just from last year in the special report, the IPCC kind of declared really that we have all the technology that we kind of need to prevent this, mostly by things that everybody has already spoken about. So no-till, cover crops, all those kinds of things, biologicals. But the challenge is for policymakers. So that is also part of my project to foster both stakeholder and policy buy-in for what we're trying to achieve. So the project sort of initially really focused on legumes because of their well-known impacts, both for this year and next year. So one of the biggest environmental things that they have is that they supply their own nitrogen, very rarely need to actually be sprayed when in the field, but they also leave nitrogen in the soil. So the following year gets a bumper crop as well, without having to spray extra. They also sequester up to 1.45 megagrams of carbon per hectare per year and emit 7 times less greenhouse gases than non-legume crops. So I was specifically tasked at the start with various legume ones, but it has expanded ever since. It keeps on expanding, actually. So these are DAFM's maps. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, but that's the way they come, unfortunately. These are the protein areas that are plotted last year, 2022, sorry, and 2023. It's a little bit hard to see here, so I put the numbers here, but you can kind of see that from 2022 to 23, there's been a 6,000 hectare increase, and this is largely due to the incentive of the protein payment that's been made for farmers, which is a subsidy that's going on, mainly because it has been realised in the last few years, because of the way things have been going, that the EU is chronically protein deficient, and Ireland is very protein deficient. We are completely reliant on imports as such. So the idea is to start to strengthen our protein abilities. So I sit in under the SDG 2.4, so the proportion of agricultural area, and this is the main part of a project really, is that it's productive and sustainable, which, as we've discussed at length, is a very hard balance to strike. So I'm going to go really fast because I've actually got an awful lot of slides, but the good news is that they're very visual, so they're very quick. But this is the EU Protein Project in its whole. So there are lots of people on various different things. So I'm task 1, which is land use and sustainability. So land use change. There's another girl on this with me who's doing the LCA analysis of plant proteins. There are colleagues that are doing variability selection. So frost tolerance, drought tolerance, winter seeds, summer seeds. There's others that are doing palatability testings up in Queen's University, so that there can be a product put out at some point. There are others doing anti-nutritional factors and amino acid profiles, isolates and protein cakes, additives that we can maybe add to feeding, and then others doing biomass so that it can be fed back into the system to complete the circle. Okay, so my specific task is this thing called species distribution modelling, or ecological niche modelling, which they're kind of interchangeably referred to in the literature. Essentially, it takes layers and adds them together along with the known places that this species actually already exists, plots it in a 3D environmental space, and then projects this into geographic space to predict where the species could be found. Nope, that's the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so I'm using WorldClim bioclimatic variables, which if anybody's familiar with, they're well established and been around for a very long time. There are 19 of them, and there are quite a good overlaps in them. So first, you obviously have to reduce any collinearity problems. So that was done with Pearson's R. Very simple heat map, basically. You're looking at anything that's as pink as it can go is very highly correlated, and anything that's as green as it can go is very low correlated. And then to reduce within variable correlation, it was subjected to VIFCOR and removed sequentially using VIFSTEP. But if there was any variable which was close in score, it was chosen for its impact on plants specifically. So these are the ones that we were left with. The reason for all of them, but so they're all included in the model. And I'll go into it a little bit more, but obviously it's all centered around soil. So without further ado, here is a soil map. So I zoomed into the global or to the European context. We actually did this on a global context, but it's much harder to visualize it when it's out global. So it's just European for today. This is the FAO is soil map. These are just the dominant ones. There are further subgroups underneath it, but the dominant ones are usually enough to give you crop suitability. So then that is sandwiched together with all of the other layers until you build up this profile. And the final thing then is putting in the species. So this is your topography. You see there that little old Ireland kind of basically fades away. But obviously it's very important in places where there are high altitudes. These crazy looking thing are your aspects. So that's your northings, your eastings, which is important when it comes to sunlight hours per day. And then your slopes, which is important when it comes to things like getting tractors up the sides of mountains, altitude species, etc. And then, so I've skipped a few, obviously, there are more in there, but these are the presence points then. So this is taken from something called GBIF, which is a global repository of species. This is faba which was one of the main ones that I was tasked with at the start. Faba is very well known for its nitrogen fixation. So it's actually on a global scale, as I say. It's just zoomed in at the moment, but so you can see there's thousands and thousands and thousands. Actually, there's hundreds of thousands of presence points for faba. Others not so much. So at this stage, they are then selected preferentially. So it was selected from 20 to 23 when I scraped it. Because GPS has so much more accuracy since then. It's a 100-meter difference. They are then subjected to spatial rarefying because there's a well-known thing of researcher bias where if it's easier to get at, it's more likely to be sampled. And it then is subjected to spatial rarefying to eliminate anything that has a linear profile because that's most likely to be a farm. So what we want to do is spread that out. And then a bias file of 200 kilometers was prepared for all of them. And that's based on something called balaglory, where seed pods burst. So that's their natural dispersal. And epizoogory then where they are further spread by a second animal, so birds usually. So this is just these are just presence points of all the species that I used in the end to model. And these are the species I used. So we've got quinoa, dun pea or field pea, as most people know it, perennial ryegrass, blue lupin, white lupin, oats, faba, and tuberosa, which is mashua, which is a tuber from South America, which has incredible nutritional value. So you can see the colors just correspond to the species and where they are currently growing. Obviously, this is a citizen science thing, so it again, the spatial rarefying is extremely important for that. So that then is one of the models when they're actually done. So as I say, it's out in the global scale. So I'm just going to hop over here. So essentially you have a heat map again. So where 0 is low suitability and 1 is the maximum suitability for this particular species. And you can see the variations across. This is for blue lupin. The current estimation is already 25 years old, but that's just the way that goes. But it's actually handy because we can then back verify it with historical records. So then I did it across SSP 2.45, 3.7 and 585. So we've got the Rocky Road 2.4, inequalities, which is 3.7, which kind of refers to some of the talks that have happened already about the kind of divide in the world where one goes ahead and one falls behind, and 585, which is called the business as usual case, pretty much catastrophic. So this next one then is 245, and this is projection, which is meant to be the future, which is kind of fast approaching at this stage, really. So yeah, so you can see that this is the same species using 245, which is the Rocky Road, which is probably the road we're on right now. This is kind of 2.1 degree warming. We're at about 1.4. So yeah, this is probably the road we're close on. But the best thing I can do for this to show you is actually just toggle between them and you can see what happens. So hopefully I get the way of this right. Yeah. So you can see that there's a rapid detraction of the site suitability for this lupin, where it basically reduces in suitability area. This then is oat, which I was eventually tasked with doing. This again is 245, so Rocky Road. So it's a good story for oat. Yeah, so again, you can see site suitability, but we also start to see areas that have not previously been arable land popping up as being highly suitable for certain things. So it can identify patterns that perhaps maybe weren't forecast or maybe weren't on people's radar as yet, as such. Okay, so this is Field P for Ireland. This one kind of surprised people because this is one of the front runners for Ireland and currently grows in Ireland. Have been asked by farmers, but I grow that and it's fairly easy. But it's blue here. I'm like, yes, it's blue, but all that means is that you have to do more management. You have to apply more nitrates. You have to apply more fertilizers and pesticides to keep your product. Doesn't mean you can't grow it. It's just going to take more to grow it. So dun pea actually grows everywhere in Ireland anyway at the moment. So what I did, because this is down at the global 1 kilometre scale, so it's absolutely enormous, it's the highest resolution you can get. So I've just pulled out a chunk that is down in Wexford-ish, which is kind of our main tillage area at the moment anyway. Just so you can see that there's sort of in-model variability, fairly well selected. It's obviously not a live model, so I can't do it here, but I can scroll that right the way down and get 1 square kilometre. So if you know that your land is inside that 1 square kilometre, you can have a look and see the scale where you are on 1 to, you actually never hit 1 for dun pea. This stops shy at 8.3, and it's actually technically not Southern Ireland, it's Northern Ireland anyway. But yeah, so you can see that you obviously this guy will have a much easier time of it than this guy, and you maybe have a look and see why. That's likely to be because of slopes, etc. But yeah, so that's how fine grained it is. Yeah, so just going to show you kind of a variety of the results that I'm getting. This is for FABA. This is the current estimation. Obviously take that with a pinch of salt since it's not. So FABA is kind of a good news story. This was expected because Ireland it's known that it's going to be a net gainer for a certain while anyway with climate change. There are some areas in the world where it will become, for a while anyway, it'll become more suitable. So this is the good news story for FABA. But the idea here being that if you do want to add in a legume crop rotation, does look like for the most part, most of Ireland can do this. This is it in 245. So it's becoming obvious that it's getting more suitable to grow FABA. And that's it in 370. So pretty much maxing out there at 1. That's it in 585. So why the drop? Because it gets too hot. It's a drought resistant species. So I'm just actually going to run through one model, one species through the whole lot of the models. And I'm going to do it fairly quickly because I want time. But so you'll see this is Lilian peren, so perennial ryegrass, which all the farmers would be delighted to hear is across the board until you hit 585 and it bottoms out. Likely again because of drought. So the initial model was done single model, then it was done threefold cross-validated. We've actually subsequently moved to HPCs and are doing it for AIC, which is still under process because I've actually killed the Teagasc HPC several times at this stage. So the results of that are still going. The models are then run with jackknives just to make sure that there's an invariable selection for that specific species. So each species comes with its own parameters as well. And I've got the other half of the task is that I do these workshops where I talk to farmers and policymakers, etc. The last ones were only a couple of weeks ago, so these are very early day results. But it's just interesting that it sort of aligns mostly with what we've kind of all been talking about and everything. The farmers aren't profitable without subsidies. There are very high antisocial hours and inadequate leave, inadequate public transport, inadequate social services. And if you're looking at sustainability, you're also talking about the social aspect of things. So how can we get farmers into it if it's not unattractive a job? And we can see that because there's a very big problem with succession in Ireland at the moment. Yeah, so they're just a few key things that came out of it so far. Very early days for that. Just wanted to say thank you. Those are my supervisors and my email address if anybody wants to contact me.